old-fashioned setting. To Theodore was left the sum of $1,500. He had received his share in the years of his musical education. Fanny Brandeis did not go to Chicago that January. She took inventory of Brandeis' Bazaar, carefully and minutely. And then, just as carefully and minutely, she took stock of Fanny Brandeis. There was something relentless and terrible in the way she went about this self-analysis. She walked a great deal that winter, often out through the drifts to the little cemetery. As she walked her mind was working, working. She held long mental conversations with herself during these walks, and once she was rather frightened to find herself talking aloud. She wondered if she had done that before. And a plan was maturing in her brain, while the fight went on within herself, thus: "You'll never do it, Fanny. You're not built that way. Oh, won't I? Watch me. Give me time. You'll think of what your mother would have done under the same conditions, and you'll do that thing. I won't. Not unless it's the long-headed thing to do. I'm through being sentimental and unselfish. What did it bring her? Nothing." The weeks went by. Fanny worked hard in the store, and bought little. February came, and with the spring her months of private thinking bore fruit. There came to Fanny Brandeis a great resolve. She would put herself in a high place. Every talent she possessed, every advantage, every scrap of knowledge, every bit of experience, would be used toward that end. She would make something of herself. It was a worldly, selfish resolve, born of a bitter sorrow, and ambition, and resentment. She made up her mind that she would admit no handicaps. Race, religion, training, natural impulses. She would discard them all if they stood in her way. She would leave Winnebago behind. At best, if she stayed there, she would never accomplish more than to make her business a more than ordinarily successful small-town store. And she would be nobody. No, she had had enough of that. She would crush and destroy the little girl who had fasted on that Day of Atonement, the more mature girl who had written the thesis about the paper mill rag room, the young woman who had drudged in the store on Elm Street. In her place she would mold a hard, keen-eyed, resolute woman, whose godhead was to be success, and to whom success would mean money and position. She had not a head for mathematics, but out of the puzzling problems and syllogisms in geometry she had retained in her memory this one immovable truth: a straight line is the shortest distance between 2 points. With her mental eye she marked her 2 points, and then, starting from the first, made directly for the second. But she forgot to reckon with the law of tangents. She forgot, too, how paradoxical a creature was this Fanny Brandeis, whose eyes filled with tears at the sight of a parade, just the sheer drama of it, where the marchers, GAR veterans, school children in white, soldiers, foresters, political marching clubs, and whose eyes burned dry and bright as she stood over the white mound in the cemetery on the state road. Generous, spontaneous, impulsive, warm-hearted, she would be cold, calculating, deliberate, she told herself. Thousands of years of persecution behind her made her quick to appreciate suffering in others, and gave her an innate sense of fellowship with the downtrodden. She resolved to use that sense as a searchlight, aiding her to see and overcome obstacles. She told herself that she was done with maudlin sentimentality. On the rare occasions when she had accompanied her mother to Chicago, the two women had found delight in wandering about the city's foreign quarters. When other small-town women buyers snatched occasional moments of leisure for the theater or personal shopping, these two had spent hours in the ghetto around Jefferson and Taylor and 14th Streets. Something in the sight of these people, alien, hopeful, emotional, often grotesque, thrilled and interested both the women. And at the sight of an ill-clad Italian, with his slovenly, wrinkled old young wife, turning the handle of his grind organ, whilst both pairs of eyes searched windows and porches and doorsteps with a hopeless sort of hopefulness, she lost her head entirely and emptied her limp pocketbook of dimes and nickels and pennies. Incidentally, it might be stated that she loved the cheap and florid music of the hand organ itself. It was rumored that Brandeis' Bazaar was for sale. In the spring, Gerritson's offered Fanny the position of buyer and head of the china, glassware, and kitchenware sections. Gerritson's showed an imposing block of gleaming plate glass front now, and drew custom from a dozen thrifty little towns throughout the Fox River Valley. Fanny refused the offer. In March she sold outright the stock, goodwill, and fixtures of Brandeis' Bazaar. The purchaser was a thrifty, far-sighted traveling man who had wearied of the road and wanted to settle down. She sold the household goods, too, those intimate personal pieces of wood and cloth that had become, somehow, part of her life. She had grown up with them. She knew the history of every nick, every scratch and worn spot. Her mother lived again in every piece. The old couch went off in a farmer's wagon. Fanny turned away when they joggled it down the front steps and into the rude vehicle. It was like another funeral. She was furious to find herself weeping again. She promised herself punishment for that. Up in her bedroom she opened the bottom drawer of her bureau. That bureau and its history, and the history of every piece of furniture in the room, bore mute testimony to the character of its occupant, to her protest against things as she found them, and her determination to make them over to suit her. She had spent innumerable Sunday mornings wielding the magic paintbrush that had transformed the bedroom from a dingy oak to a gleaming cream enamel. She sat down on the floor now before the bureau and opened the bottom drawer. In a corner at the back, under the neat pile of garments, was a tightly rolled bundle of cloth. Fanny reached for it, took it out, and held it in her hands a moment. Then she unrolled it slowly, and the bundle revealed itself to be a faded, stained, voluminous gingham apron, blue and white. It was the kind of apron women don when they perform some very special household ritual, baking, preserving, house cleaning. It crossed over the shoulders with straps, and its generous fullness ran all the way around the waist. It was discolored in many places with the brown and reddish stains of fruit juices. It had been Molly Brandeis's canning apron. Fanny had come upon it hanging on a hook behind the kitchen door, after that week in December. And at the sight of it her fortitude and forced calm had fled. She had spread her arms over the limp, mute, yet speaking thing dangling there, and had wept so wildly and uncontrollably as to alarm even herself. Nothing in connection with her mother's death had power to call up such poignant memories as did this homely, intimate garment. She saw again the steamy kitchen, deliciously scented with the perfume of cooking fruit, or the tantalizing, mouth-watering spiciness of vinegar and pickles. On the stove, the big dishpan in which the jelly glasses and fruit jars, with their tops and rubbers, bobbed about in hot water. In the great granite kettle simmered the cooking fruit. Molly Brandeis, enveloped in the familiar blue and white apron, stood over it like a priestess, stirring, slowly, rhythmically. Her face would be hot and moist with the steam, and very tired, too, for she often came home from the store utterly weary, to stand over the kettle until 10 or 11 o'clock. But the pride in it as she counted the golden or ruby-tinted tumblers gleaming in orderly rows as they cooled on the kitchen table. 15 glasses of grape jell, Fan, and I didn't mix a bit of apple with it. I didn't think I'd get more than 10. And 9 of the quince preserve. That makes, let me see, 83, 98, 107 altogether. We'll never eat it, Mother. You said that last year, and by April my preserve cupboard looked like old Mother Hubbard's. But then Mrs. Brandeis was famous for her preserves, as Father Fitzpatrick and Aloysius and Dr. Thalmann and a dozen others could testify. After the strain and flurry of a busy day at the store, there was something about this homely household rite that brought a certain sense of rest and peace to Molly Brandeis. All this moved through Fanny Brandeis's mind as she sat with the crumpled apron in her lap, her eyes swimming with hot tears. The very stains that discolored it, the faded blue of the front breadth, the frayed buttonhole, the little scorched place where she had burned a hole while trying unwisely to lift a steaming kettle from the stove with the apron's corner, spoke to her with eloquent lips. That apron had become a vice with Fanny. She brooded over it as a mother broods over the shapeless, scuffed bit of leather that was a baby's shoe, as a woman, widowed, clings to a shabby, frayed old smoking jacket. More than once she had cried herself to sleep, with the apron clasped tightly in her arms. She got up from the floor now, with the apron in her hands, and went down the stairs, opened the door that led to the cellar, walked heavily down those steps and over to the furnace. She flung open the furnace door. Red and purple the coal bed gleamed, with little white flame sprites dancing over it. Fanny stared at it a moment, fascinated. Her face was set, her eyes brilliant. Suddenly she flung the tightly rolled apron into the heart of the gleaming mass. She shut her eyes then. The fire seemed to hold its breath for a moment. Then, with a gasp, it sprang upon its food. The bundle stiffened, writhed, crumpled, sank, lay a blackened heap, was dissolved. The fire bed glowed red and purple as before, except for a dark spot in its